I have a theory about what makes Elden Ring such a uniquely replayable game, and I've put this theory together because of a kind of confusion that I experience whenever I try to understand how Elden Ring keeps pulling me back in to keep playing a year and a half after its release. Because after initially beating it, it's kind of turned into the game that I play in between other games or as a palate cleanser. And it still sometimes happens that I'll buy a new game for $50 or $60, play it for a couple hours, and then just go back to Elden Ring. And of course, on the surface, there's nothing particularly strange about that because Elden Ring is one of the most beloved games of all time. But when I really dig down and examine the mechanics of the game and ask myself, why do I keep playing this thing? I do get kind of confused because at the end of the day, the combat is extremely simple. There might be a pretty big variety of builds that you can create for your character, but once you do pick any particular build, your moveset is pretty limited, especially by today's standards. There really aren't any combos to worry about like in Devil May Cry, there's no unlockable ability tree like in God of War. The bread and butter of combat is light attack, heavy attack, dodge, and block. You'll also use a weapon art if you're fancy, but this is really a game where the bread and butter is the whole meal. You're pretty much just going to be dodging and blocking and then landing 1 or 2 lighter heavy attacks at a time in between enemy attack animations. That's literally the whole game. And in my own experience, whenever I settle on a build, my playstyle gets established pretty early on in a playthrough, and then the game becomes honestly a little bit repetitive. There's not a lot of gameplay variety. I'm not like designing new techniques for solving problems the way you might in an isometric CRPG or even something a little bit more recent like Tears of the Kingdom, where that's honestly the whole game. And of course, because Elden Ring is a FromSoft game, there's also zero effort to break up the gameplay with something like cutscenes that can provide some narrative gratification and a break from the grind. Instead, once I start playing this game, I'm locked into a pretty rigidly defined and narrow gameplay loop for more or less an entire playthrough. And when you put it like that, it doesn't sound like a fun game. It's mechanically simple action combat with no gameplay variety and a limited moveset. And yet, I have put more hours into this game than any other game that I have played in my adult life. I love it. I always want to play it. I don't even play the games I buy sometimes because I just want to go back to Elden Ring. So how is it that this game's mechanically simple action combat has such a long shelf life? How does it not go stale? How does it stay interesting? That's the question that I want to try to answer in this video. I think that Elden Ring's incredible longevity is a consequence of a fundamental fact about the kind of combat that this game is built around. And if I had to summarize Elden Ring's combat in a single word, I would say that it's all about reactivity. Elden Ring is all about reading the enemy and reacting to attack patterns by dodging, blocking, and parrying. That means that at a fundamental level, you're not really allowed to set the pace of combat if you're going to succeed at any minimally challenging encounter. You have to let the enemy set the pace of combat with their attack patterns, and your job is to learn the rhythm of their movements and then forge your own gameplay rhythm in response, where you kind of dance around their attacks and do little bits of damage whenever you find an opening. And that is what I call reactive gameplay. It's gameplay where everything you do, and I mean everything, is part of a calculated reaction to the enemy's attack patterns. Even when you're the one who's going on the attack, that's always a kind of reaction to the enemy, because you don't just swing your sword in Elden Ring. You always swing it as part of a well-timed strategic strike that you make in the 3-second window where you know the enemy is temporarily unable to attack. And if you miss that window, you're going to get punished for it. And if you never learn how to respect that window, you're just not going to progress in the game. And the thing about this type of reactive gameplay is that it has a natural power to draw you into the game world and to immerse you. That's because it simply takes a huge amount of concentration and focus to watch the enemy, read the enemy, interpret their upcoming attacks, and then react with the right moves and timing. All of your mental energy and attention is going to get sucked up in the effort required to pull off that kind of reactive gameplay. And once you appreciate that the combat of Elden Ring is entirely about reactivity, I think it becomes a little bit easier to understand why this game is also a little bit mechanically simple, and why your offensive moveset is kind of limited relative to other action combat games in the AAA space. Your job in this game is not to come up with intricate attack patterns or sophisticated offensive techniques. Your own attacks are not supposed to be at the foreground of your attention. It's the enemy that you have to be thinking about. It's the rhythms of their movements that you have to be tracking. And that's why Elden Ring can be a mechanically simple game without actually being simple to play. It's because the game is about reactive combat, and the complexity of this game comes from coordinating your own simple moveset with complex enemy attack patterns. And I also think that the reactive nature of Elden Ring's combat goes a long way toward explaining why it's so replayable. It answers the puzzle that I raised at the beginning of this video of how a mechanically simple game never goes stale. As I said before, Elden Ring's reactive gameplay makes huge demands on your concentration and focus. You're always having to keep track of the enemy's rhythms and kind of feel them in your bones to forge the timing and rhythms of your own reactions. And when you're doing this, your mind almost goes into a kind of trance because you just don't have room to think about anything else. You're too busy reading the enemy's movements and asking yourself what's going to happen on a second-to-second basis and how you need to respond. And so the reactive gameplay of Elden Ring just has this natural power to draw you into the world, to draw you into the action, and to cast you into that flow state of pure fun. It's almost as though FromSoft has discovered a gameplay formula in which having fun is a core mechanic of the game, because you literally cannot defeat someone like Malekith, for example, without entering that flow state. And it's not exactly because you need to have fun in order to win, but it's because you need to give Malekith your undivided attention to squeeze out a victory. And that's all a flow state really is. It's just being so interested in what you're doing that your attention is completely undivided. And to my mind, this is really the secret to why Elden Ring is so replayable. It's because its reactive gameplay simply demands your undivided attention if you want to progress the main dungeons and boss encounters. And that never stops being fun, because having fun simply is the experience of giving your undivided attention to an activity and losing yourself within it. Before I end this video, I want to make one caveat about this story that I'm telling about Elden Ring. I think you could argue that my theory about what makes it so replayable is not actually terribly unique to this game in particular, because it kind of applies to every game in the Soulsborne series. All of them have the same basic mechanics. They give you a simple offensive moveset, and they all rely for their complexity on the way in which you have to read and react to enemy attacks. And of course, all the Soulsborne games are famously replayable too, because what can I say, it's just a winning formula. I actually have a video on Sekiro that you should totally check out, where I argue that it has the most complex reactive gameplay of any game that FromSoftware has made since Demon's Souls. And in some ways, I think that this makes Sekiro the mechanical masterpiece of this era of FromSoftware's output. But Sekiro's unique complexity also makes it the most brutally difficult game of that same era, and for that reason, I'll probably never replay it because it's just so freaking hard. Elden Ring, on the other hand, while it is hard on a first playthrough, is really nowhere near Sekiro levels, and then on subsequent playthroughs it kind of mellows out. And at that point, it strikes this really enjoyable balance where it still keeps you on your toes, it still demands your attention in that endlessly fun sort of way, but the process also becomes relatively frictionless, so you can just fire up the game and you'll just melt away into the combat. And that's what keeps me coming back for more. So I guess another aspect of Elden Ring's replayability is that it's hard, but it's not too hard. So once you get the hang of how things work, it will devour your attention in that kind of addictive way, but it won't disturb you in the way that, I'll be real, Sekiro kind of disturbs me with its brutality. God damn, I never want to fight the frickin' Guardian Ape ever again. But anyways, that's all I wanted to say about Elden Ring for this video. That's my 2 cents. And hey, I'd love to hear from you too. Let me know if you find Elden Ring as replayable as I do. And in particular, I'd love to hear your theory about what keeps you coming back to this game, because maybe my theory doesn't apply to you. Maybe it's just me. Or, you know, maybe there are lots of different reasons why people play this game. I do know that my own emphasis on the reactive gameplay of Elden Ring sort of simplifies things and leaves out a lot of other details about what makes it so great, like its amazing art direction, just to name one thing. So let me know if there's something important that you think I left out. And as always, my name's Chumpy. If you enjoyed this video, consider giving it a like, and if you want to see more essays on games, consider subscribing to this channel. I make 1 or 2 essays a month, and I try to pump out a few shorts every week. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.